All right, good afternoon and welcome back to the conference. The next plenary section is a comprehensive front-end planning, making the right initial decisions. I believe that is a really good theme for the day of today. And I'm part of the team that is presenting this subject in conjunction with Jay and Ted. I think, Jay, you can take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Rana. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here at this extremely informative and thought-provoking conference, as always in the past, on this second afternoon. So during this module, we will be discussing some practical recommendations that need to be implemented on projects to be successful. We actually started out with should, but then we thought it's really important to emphasize the significance of getting it right in the front end. And during the course of that, we'll also be doing a bit of role play as owner with the responsibilities of the owner, EPC with the processes, and technology provider and consultant. And then we'll keep some time as usual for question and answers at the end. So starting with introductions, my name is Jay Prakash. Next slide. Okay, let me move that. Oops. Okay. I need to go back. Yeah. So my name is Jay Prakash, and I'm currently an AWP advisor for major projects. Many years in the construction and multiple roles, working advanced work packaging for the last 7 or 8 years on various sizes of projects. I really don't know if I need to introduce my fellow panelists. They're so well known across the industry. Silvana Lara, the global AWP director for Floor, and the Astros fan, Ted. Ted Blackman's the founder of Constructex and the CEO. With that, I'm going to start with my slide on the owner's role and elaborate on 3 key bullets that I see. Oops. Setting up the strategy, defining AWP requirements in the contract, and then providing the stewardship and driving the compliance. Strategy, there's a number of factors that influence strategy, the size of the project, the type of contract, experience of stakeholders. Size of the project, of course, will dictate the spend and the organization, the type of organization that can be set up. The type of contract, whether it's reimbursable, lump sum, EPC, EP, and C, cost per schedule driven will have an impact. Obviously, an understanding of the implications and liabilities of each of these is key. The work breakdown structure, detailing of it, getting right, the schedule, path of construction, critical paths, some of the upfront costs that are entailed, and very important to drive towards a win-win approach consisting of a fit-for-purpose applications that would benefit both owner and contractor, and of course, the biggest gainer would be the project. So ensuring a supportive organization for both owner and contractor. My second bullet is on what to include in the bid slate and contracts and specification. What I've seen, and I'm sure everybody in the room would have seen that as well, more and more contractors are realizing the competitive advantages in implementing the most impactful system of AWP to build better, more efficiently, for less cost than traditional methods, and then also getting improved safety, quality, schedule, cost, predictability, all of that in the bargain. However, the owners still need to spell out requirements for AWP in the contract with detail on expectations and processes. What I've seen is that just asking for, hey, implement AWP could result in a situation where it's whose AWP, yours or mine? And if there's a multiple contractors involved with the joint venture, it could get even trickier. So detailing the expectations or milestones on path of construction, engineering processes, model maturity, procurement and material management, vendor engagement, vendor management, construction phase, work phase planning requirements, rolling over into completions. All of these influence the ultimate performance of advanced work packaging and including expectations for them would rule out ambiguities in interpretation. And then it's really important to ensure that there is better tracking and control of deliverables at each stage for proactive intervention as needed. And that can only happen if there is visibility and transparency of real-time performance through dashboards and KPIs. We've had a lot of stress on data and the data and documentation to support a data and deliverables-centric project, ensuring a single source of truth with integration between data systems. Data we know as with the new oil and all that, but realize that the lack of integrity of data and across systems, integration across systems, will render a lot of that data unusable. And this needs to tie in to feed the systems and dashboards. This becomes especially challenging when there are multiple contractors. So we need to ensure that this is planned for in the contract and in the schedule. I'll tell you, every software vendor in the room will tell you that they will deliver the world. And I have a lot of friends in that space. And they do deliver the world, but they need time to establish the setup and integration. And it's their time. Project controls and payment milestones definition as per AWP best practice is really important to drive the project. And then let's not forget training of stakeholders and all participants to ensure that everyone has the same understanding of AWP and deliverables, and then that leads to greater alignment across all the key stakeholders, owner, EPC contractors, subcontractors. And hence, most importantly, through that we ensure that every stakeholder is aligned under and helping support the successful delivery of the AWP program. And then also greater alignment across phases of the project, E to P to C to completions. Remember the famous saying that the last 10% of construction could take 30% or more man hours? Ever seen that happen? So need to ensure that that's factored in as well. And then the extent of digitization, the digital twin, virtual construction model, etc. All of that would be needed to put it into the contract to ensure that he got what is desired. And my last bullet is on stewardship and compliance through front-end planning. And this is all about leadership. I cannot stress on this enough. Often we lose ourselves in trying to get good tools, develop processes, and don't nearly pay as much importance to the people. This is the single most important thing to support the processes and tools. So leadership in ensuring the buy-in across all stakeholders, putting in the teamwork and building a partnership approach that includes management of change and expectations, dealing with all of that. That's an important role for the leadership. So that's my input, and with that, I'll hand over to Silvana for the EPC role.
Thank you, Dave. I just want to take your attention, and everybody, it's clear for all of us in the industry that it's easy to implement any process or procedure early in the project. We will see the last cost impact in that implementation, and we will see a better result in those kind of implementation. That's the reason that I will say we will need to focus always and try to get advanced work packaging implemented as early as possible in the project. Saying that, on this slide would represent in this diagram a summary of all the important activities that and interactions that we have in advanced work packaging during all the phases of the project, correct? And if you see here, the first one that we have is on the proposal phase. As you see, we start with all the proposal phase documents, the baseline of the document for the project. We have the definition of the roles and responsibilities. We need to be ensured that we have some kind of language on the prime contract. We definitely need to get clear scope definition and the execution that guideline all our process. We need to be sure that we have everything on our control-based schedule and our estimate for the people that we're going to be using and the resources and tools that we're going to be using during the proposal phase to support advanced work packaging. And that is what we say we have probably the majority of the time when I'm doing some of the proposals or some presentations internally in my company. we definitely see, okay, Silvana, when we need to call you and have the input for the advanced work packaging department. And I always say for everybody, if you didn't put my input or the input for advanced work packaging requirements on the proposal phase, we are late. However, saying that, and the point that I made at the beginning of the presentation is never too late, and we are just at the start of the project, and we still can do a big impact on the basic and the preliminary. The basic and the preliminary engineering construction interface, and we can define that. And you see on the block of the FEED and the design engineering, there are the majority of our activities, and all those they go around the path, the definition of the path of construction. However, it is not the most important part. We have the data requirements, we have the CWP release process, we have points there for roles and responsibilities of each one of the functions that are part of the project. Define a staff, and in each one of the projects, not only the workplace planning and the IT support people that is needed as well. Those are the basis of our AWP interaction with during those phases, correct? Fluor, in the design phase and FEED phase, we are able to see if in those two blocks, we start to get more deep interaction on or definitions of each one of those previous activities. Define all practice and procedures as apply for that project specific. And when we define the specific practices that we have in Fluor for the implementation of advanced work packaging, we definitely recommend as well to get the basis of the CI and the best practices as well. However, it is important that each one of the projects have their own specific and details that they come to drive this advanced work package. We do that in the form of job bulletins, and those are just specific for each one of the project implementations. A couple of points that you can probably see in those block of slides for FEED and design. For the engineer part, and we are being hearing this today during all day, is data standard. The definition of the data standard from engineering, it is probably, I will say, one of the most cultural change that we are seeing in the industry in the last couple of years. It is a major key point on the AWP journey. We hear that in our super video this morning, and we have a different examples for data standard. We have the ones that are provided by CI. We have some standard that each one of the EPC definitely have. However, it is important when we are talking about the data standard, we tie this with how much is the maturity of that information that we receive from engineering, and what we are actually really getting on, what are the real expectations from the construction, the project control, and the supply chain for that information that we are getting for engineering. It is important to get that from material management, from contract point of view, from the schedule level to for the level to a schedule, and as well for the subcontractor that will be responsible for each one of the scope of work that they're going to be executed in the field. We can't leave at the end everything related to the system and the subsystem and commissioning and setup prioritization, correct? Those are the key points that will define my data information that we receive, what we need at the beginning of the project. But with a quote clear understanding that they will be a live document and will be developed and get fit during all the different stages of the project, correct? The path of construction is our next big block, and what is the ideal, and this is the ideal construction execution, not only taking in consideration construction of the stand, as well all the process that engineer need to have, correct? We hear a lot of time that we have a tower before we need it, or we have some equipment waiting for 6 or 7 months on the laydown area, and we don't have the space for that. Definitely, we need to understand as well what is the requirements from the engineer to design each one of those materials that we are receiving, and get a good involvement and interaction to define the real path of construction that involve not only the construction best execution, something that is able, that engineering and supply chain is able to support. We saw yesterday in some of the presentations for the different groups that we need some of the work phase planning information in the advanced work in the path of construction. And this needs to be clear defined. What is the information that we are moving for planning? If we go to the block of the construction phase, we start to see that in this phase, the project planning is almost done. We start to get more on the execution and implementation of what we already have planned. And just here, we are just aligning the team on the construction side just to be able to perform and integrate and develop our IWPs. When we develop our IWPs, we need to keep points here to ensure that we are able to align the IWPs with the path of construction, that we have the real proactive and collaboration environment for discipline, that we are able to get all of them in the right path of construction, and just to get all the IWPs aligned with the constraint management that we can get. Oops, I think. All right. On our next slide is the slide that I call the full AWP implementation for our company. And it is definitely a holistic approach where we have the need for support from project management, and as well, like Jay said at the beginning, the support for the client, and not only the support for each one of the clients. We need definitely get all information for that, all support that we can get from the sponsors of the meeting of the project. Correct? This is a collaborative approach where we need to get all the right setup at the beginning of the project to be able to peel this onion that advanced work packaging is just involving all the full of the disciplines, when the only final result is just get the work phase planning, the right tools at the right time, and the right sequence. If I just kind of give you the time for, with the time I have, I just gonna give you 2 or 3 key points for each one of those functions, just to get the vision of where we need to get to align in each one of them. For engineering, the first one, data requirements. The early definition of the data requirement is a key and crucial point. We heard yesterday multiple times on the CI data requirements update from the team that this information is key and crucial on that. However, this is a great base to start for each one of the company, for each one of us, that each company needs to review those ones and be sure that we adapt our process and procedures to support that data requirements. I remember a couple of years ago, probably a year before the data standards for CI set up, we set a group of people from all the engineer functions, civil, structural steel, electrical, instrumentation, piping, and others. And we put Dario, who was one of the presenters yesterday on the data standards, to get what is for us the specific data that we need on the construction site that will serve the construction automation tools, and that our engineer group is able to produce without causing too much destruction for them. It was a a great exercise, and there were points where we need to probably have understanding what the engineering can do and what engineer cannot do for us, correct? The second point for the engineer is we need to have a clear point of CWEP's release review. We need to create a CWEP ISC release quality review with all the construction and all the engineer part involved, where we define that definitely that CWEP that it is getting out for construction is complete. They have the quality of the data, and we are able to execute that on the field. And the third point for engineering is definitely the maturity of the data that's required, and it's different and diverse for each one of the stages of the project, correct? Is the integrity of that data and the maturity is different what we're gonna get on the feed phase that we're gonna get on the at the end of the design. We can get a preliminary list of CWEAs and a full list of CWEAs at the end of feed and a preliminary list of CWEPs at the end of feed. But this document it will be a live document during the design and design phase, and we're going to be adding or removing some of the CWEPs during the execution. The next part for the supply chain. When we talk about supply chain, we start to put in context what we need for our material request, correct? What information is related to the material assigned to, that need to be assigned to each one of the CWEPs, the RAS date that we need those material inside, the vendor information that we need for each one of those materials, and as well, from the data point of view, what information we will get from our fabricators, not only from the point of view of the Tekla model for structural steel, as well for our pipe fabricator, and how we are able to integrate that information to get it in our model for be able to consume on the construction side. Another great point for supply chain is what we need to expect, what we need to do for our responsibility matrix. Which one of the scope of work for our subcontract is included for each one of the CWEPs. Establish that the contract documents, it is specific for the AWP requirement. For example, if we have a subcontract for filing, the information on each one of the IWPs on this subcontract will be different to the IWPs that we asked for a subcontract on the E&I space. That's something that we need to go get details and get included on the contract language in each one of our subcontracts. From the quality point of view, we have ITPs and ITRs that define and there are the which ones that are applicable for a specific tag item that are included on the IWPs. Define the process to transfer the information for what is in the IWP. It is close to the, and to be close for the quality and to know the record that keep the systems. Definitely, it is what we normally know in the industry as a progressive turnover. Jay said really well on his opening. The last 10% cost the 30% of the project. If we don't have good management of our information and our quality records are not up to date, we will have big problems during the turnover phase. On the construction and automation part, we will define the tools that we will use for uncovering each one of the requirements on the field. It is not the same that it is not the same set of tools that we're gonna use in a construction like LNGC project or the tools that we're gonna have in a small project. That those definitions need to be clear at the beginning of the project to be able to get the right budget and the right resources available for set up those tools. Define the process with the data interface is another point that is really key on the construction automation, and establish a validation process of the data that we'll receive from engineering, material, project control, and construction progress. If we don't do a quality check of the data that we are receiving, we're never going to be sure that we have the right output for our tools. On the project control side, it is important to identify the level of details that we're going to have in our schedule at the different phase of the project, and this is related to the maturity of the data again. And it needs to be understood that the process, that the well-defined process during the engineer will have the right maturity data in the model, in the drawings, in all the different information that we have during the different level of the schedule in the project. Estimated quantities and man hours per CWP. That's key important point, that the manpower and the quantities need to be by CWP. That will align the baseline, that will need to be aligned with the baseline of our project at the beginning. For HSE, we have a couple of points this morning. Bring HSE representative to the constructability reviews that will help to feed in the design phase as well, and that will minimize the exposure of the project, of the hours of the project. If we are able to peel this onion and get a good alignment with each one of those items and those key points that have been mentioned, I will say a construction management time will be much easier during the work phase planning development. And they always will need to fix any kind of changes or development or the development of the IWPs, or additional the construction constraints that we have in the field. Definition of the project management change is a good, clear understanding that we need to have in construction. If we don't have a clear change management process and well-defined solution, we will not be able to get alignment and follow the procedures that we have and the planning that we have in the previous stages. Probably, and to close here, share the knowledge and improve the information and all the additional information that will always have a lot of room to improvement, and that will define a better solutions for each one of our new projects. We always keep taking the good lesson learned from project to project, set up for interfaces between tools from project to project, and share this information with new project team is what we are seeing right now, that it is in our success in next implementation of projects. I think that's the last of my slides, and I will get back to Ted.
All right, how's the audio? Can everyone hear me out there? I'm hoping so. First, I want to thank Group ASI for putting this event on, and through the COVID time, I really wish it was a face-to-face and being in Houston, but I love that circular diagram that Silvana showed before. It's like being in the batter's up circle here. I also want to thank Viva for giving me the opportunity to be a panelist on this keynote plenary session. And finally, I'll keep it short, but I want to give a big congratulations to both Jamie and Mark for their individual awards they received yesterday. I think that's a great addition to the overall AWP conference. Also, those awards for those two individuals are so well deserved. The enthusiasm, the dedication, the passion, the willingness to share, and as two owners that have helped get AWP to where we are, both Jamie and Mark have done so much to further the adoption and the benefits received from AWP. And I think that they largely are representative of the larger community here, and creating this community where we can drive change in the industry. It's exciting when you feel that you're part of changing such a big industry, and this revolution of AWP and construction and capital projects are here. So again, thanks for your dedication and participation. Big congratulations. A lot of what I'm going to say will build upon the previous points that Jay and Silvana made. I'll add a few more in on the technology part, but I'm calling this, and let's get to the practical side of it. I'm put this together specific for the show and the panel, the ABCs of planning for success in AWP. One is, the principles of AWP are somewhat inherently universal, this iterative planning and getting things lined up and plan it, then execute it. But there's no doubt that, the bringing together people, process, and technology, and the people side of things are key. Get leadership buy-in and realize that that's not something you just do once. And depending upon whether it's a scalable AWP program where you're applying AWP across smaller projects in an operating facility, or whether you're taking AWP onto a mega project or a giga project, or even somewhere in between, you really need to have a fit for purpose training program and orientation program for the leadership, which also allows them to shape it. And the earlier you do that, the basic principles most people in the industry are going to get, they've been wanting it. Everybody's been wanting to have this better result, but you've got to put it in the context of the project or the program. And so really a fit for purpose training program. To think you're just going to have participants go to a general orientation session and have the biggest impact that you want on the project, really getting a fit for purpose training program together, and realize that it's multi-stakeholder. You're really aligning the leadership across the owner, the primary EPC, where you may have joint venture construction partners in. You need to get the buy-in and the understanding across those participants, and everybody needs to have a sense of what are they committing to. And Jay put it very well, like whose version of AWP? It's not a single thing. It's really something that emanates itself not only in this people, process, technology, but there's a culture that sets in, and getting it aligned around those participants and the stakeholder buy-in is just so key, because not everything, just like the construction project, not everything's going to go according to plan. You can plan it up to more detail, but don't believe AWP is do a lot of detailed planning up front and then everything flows. Yes, that is aspect of it, but also realize the agility is an essential element that differentiated AWP from just lean construction, which is where the roots of AWP really came from, this idea of production control and bringing production science from last planner principles into the field. And so ultimately you want to have that big field impact, but you've got to have the leadership buy-in and their commitment to stay in it. So as you iterate and figure out, so the training and the buy-in amongst the stakeholders are key. 2, the contract requirements become essential. And it's not just the delivery of who's doing what in the organizational element. And I've got to emphasize that I've heard a few times the idea that AWP is a process. From my perspective, AWP is a methodology that combines the people, process, and technology. And again, don't forget about culture, because that can eat your lunch. But the fact is, processes change based upon the technology, based upon the capability, the maturity level of the different stakeholders. And critical to this, where this is about the upfront engineering, is realizing that a large portion of the engineering is in the supply chain, the procurement side. And so as you have those early feed developments and procurement contracts are going to be set, realize the primary EPC is going to engage with supplier stakeholders, where the vendor suppliers, especially the major equipment suppliers, and if there's big compressors and other major packages from vendors that are the size of a Siemens or a GE or a Toshiba, or whatever vendors are bringing major capability to the table, those procurement contracts initiate design and engineering work that also begins and starts to happen and emanates itself very heavily in the detailed phase. And so it's important to include detailed contractual specifications. So as the digital threads data model got published and finally surfaced after almost a decade of development dating back from 2014, the need to, the intent isn't just how do I build one system and how do I pass data from engineering to the constructor, but more so how do I take those data requirements and turn them into deliverables. A package fundamentally is a work package, is a contract. It's a scope and a division of work regarding engineering or procurement. And again, these vendor deliverables have design information, and there's coordination with other designers, and our need to get more robust on taking the data definitions, understanding the people side and the element of the stakeholder organizations, and having those data deliverables be put in the specific contracts. I'm going to give a nod out to Kenny Kelly, who I've worked with for such a long period of time, and the success he's been able to have in implementing a programmatic approach at Dow with John Coombs and Karen and the whole team. We found it was critically essential to get the supply chain on board. And then once you do that, you'll learn that the structural fabricators, they don't have to fabricate it according to the delivery schedule, but they certainly can line up their sequences with the CWPs, get it coordinated. They can tune their deliveries. In Kenny knows is better than anybody. He was able to get bolt up and bolts and gaskets delivered on an AWP project according to the IWPs by getting the supplier stakeholders on board. So you're minimizing double handling of materials. And those vendor contracts also for the pipe fabricator, the steel detailing, the equipment vendors, and ultimately the work-phase planning contract requirements for the constructors, and having that lined up with requirements that are set in and solidified, again, specific to a project for the EPC primary contractor or joint venture partner. Those contract requirements don't stand in isolation. They need to be tuned. And so really you need to take the guidelines and then tune them for the specifics of that project as to who's delivering what and what information is needed from one party to be utilized by another in order to support their participation in AWP. And then the final practical advice I'll have is, again, don't think you're going to get it all right at the start. As the contract quilt evolves, there is a general disconnect between the level of tracking. It's not just the engineering data, but how that engineering data is going to emanate into rules of progress, both at a schedule level, so we can track the schedule in terms of EPC and owner visibility against the original EPC schedule that comes out of the back end of the feed process. But that onboarding of contractors is where the rubber meets the road, and where the contractors' tools, whether they're going to adopt the tools that were put together. We had some great successes, and I've seen great successes where the owner and the EPC can provide the tools to the contractors and prop it up on a silver platter. But a lot of contractors are going to have their own tools. And you start to get in a marry up of the technology, which goes back to, again, alignment of the people, process, and who's responsible for what, and realizing that you may not have the contract specs completely in terms of who's going to be doing what scope of work, and a CWP might need to be split. So give yourself the budget to realize what you put up front needs to also be agilely iterated as those actual contracts are now being issued post-feed, and now you're engaging with where the work-phase planning and the tools of the contractors will come into place. Really critical to have that agility in bringing that forward. Here I'm showing the Viva Unified Project Execution Platform, and one of the things I want to emphasize is that we're advancing into a state where engineering and the engineering software vendors are fully embracing. And this isn't just representative of what a solution provider like a Viva can bring to the table, but by and large, the tools that you're going to need that aren't the design tools where you're generating the engineering information. But one critical thing you can see and understand as well is this type of execution platform should be established prior to engineering even starting. I mean, your estimating and your platform approach can be essential in terms of driving the right data gathering and data requirements up front. But again, it's not here to just represent this, what's really a potential game-changing platform, bringing 5D costs to the table, where most of the plant industry hasn't yet adopted into how do I leverage that data in the model parametrics, where I can begin to get better estimates, and went back to a point that Silvana made, which is you really want to get your BOQs and your quantities organized by your CWAs, broken down into your CWPs. It's not just the material list, it's the BOQs. And that's also where that rubber meets the road, that the way the BOQs may be initially utilized for early estimating and feed estimating is going to be different, and needs to be sensitive to the fact that a construction contractor might track things by diameter inch on their welding. And a lot of as AWP is going global, the way that business is done in North America doesn't necessarily represent. And even in North America, there's a great variety between the different major contractors and even the mid-tiers. The tracking level of how we're going to track those quantities need to be bolted up and married and refined as you move from the CWP delivery into the contractors, so that then we can have alignment of that data back. So there's a heightened level of data sensitivity again in terms of that adjustment. But ultimately, you know, being at the core of what the industry is driving forward is this magic, and we've seen it in the other presentations and the keynotes, and you know, being able to bring the data together so that ultimately kind of paint the vision of what we're all achieving and driving towards, is being able to see a vendor package, and even if it's as simple as a pump or a big exchanger, the fact that that data should be linked with other data, so that then I have that available in a digitally connected environment where the information that construction needs doesn't have to be searched through in paper packages and finding it in different folder structures within the document management system. It will exist as a system of record. And we did that really well also with KPJV, where Floor was engaged, where the team on site could click on a big concrete block, and suddenly the drawings associated with were available to the planners before they were building their IWP, so they could go in and iterate that detailed construction plan. That data connectivity becomes essential, so that then the collection of data and documents associated with that equipment and other things, and then the vision of the future that I'm painting here is, whereas status visualization's been applied so well in terms of saying, well, show me my piping that's on site, or show me my piping that's ready. What about show me my piping that's affected by a vendor delay? Because that path of construction and path of engineering, it can be systematically aligned if we get it right, so that an impact of a vendor delay in one CWA and CWP and EWP may impact another EWP on the other side of the plant. There's great CII documentation from 20 plus years ago on the path of engineering and how engineering dependencies span across areas. And that's critical capability that I believe we're on just the verge of industry breakthrough. But I'll come back to that data. And again, just the Tom Morris and Ted Weitzman and the teams from Shell and Eastman, and I apologize, I'm not giving thanks off and hats off to enough of the participants, but it was really owner-led, owners that were able to bring, hey, what's the information we need? And we want to begin with the end in mind. Now, from my perspective, it lines up where if we're going to specify that information, the vision that I got brought into in the industry back in the 1990s when FIATech was just formed was owners also saying, hey, we want to get data into operations. And it's not the same exact data. And you can differentiate between what's needed for construction and what's needed for operations. But as we put that together, I'll go back to it being, this isn't some just magical technical thing of how do we realize this digital twin, and how do we, one of the primary cases, and the early constructor and engineering participants realized that the constructor may need structural still data from a fabricator, but that contracts with the prime EPC. And if the prime EPC doesn't request the still fabricator to deliver the structural still detailing data, I don't get the automated packaging, and I don't get that. I mean, with vendor data, it's even more difficult, and vendors in the loop, but you just take a fabricator, you have this issue that you've got to take some practical advice out of the vision for the future. You've got to take your digital threads and your data requirements, and you need to tune them to the specifics of the stakeholders by role, across company, in reality, across clouds. Not everything's going to operate in just one big central cloud. What's happening with the technology being more and more readily adopted to give these type of, what at times appear for somebody in the field to be a magic capability that they never had before, is you may have 3 different document management systems in place, and you will on projects. Everybody's going to have their own set of tools, but you've got to personalize it. And it's about data being provided by one participant being used by another. Sometimes that data, is within a single stakeholder, but not everyone on the project is going to become an expert in AWP. In the basic lesson learned of practicality, comes down to, well, just tell me what I need to do. I understand the principles, but if I'm the piping engineer, or if I'm a supplier as a fabricator, I've got a certain process. What are you asking me to do? What information is needed? And the why is important, but they don't have to become the AWP expert, but you've got to realize the digital threads are connecting stakeholders, and having those data requirements tied to the data usage and the understanding of how you then emanate those into actual execution contracts in the project become a critical part of all this. And I'll kind of wrap up with, and I was really excited to see Mark on the stage in his video earlier today. I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed working with Mark Meadow over the years. But I believe as an AWP community, we are now ready to evolve to the next stage, and we're seeing things already happening where this lean and agile project management principles can be applied into the E and P phase. And I will emphasize again that to a large extent, the P phase is part of E, because much of the engineering is happening, and engineering dependencies and constraint management happen there. And I absolutely believe, although I don't think we're really there yet, but there's this idea that, well, hey, I need to add more money into the engineering. It's actually a shift of budget, but engineering, the earliest AWP implementations, we had to document engineering savings that could also pay for the tools, until CII published these great results where everybody's still skeptical until they realize them. It was, AWP wasn't just something, hey, I'm going to put it in. It was like, if we're going to use this technology in this new work process, how do I pay for it? Well, let me use the automation to make a savings during the E&P phase. And so I know that savings can be realized, but we're just, I believe, at the tip of the iceberg, wrap up into questions. And so streamlining that path of engineering with the path of construction can be done if we further drive and adopt those principles and include procurement. 2 quick points, and I'm not going to try to explain them, but there should be driving our collective community. The first to go is the last to know. And it's that civil works that often can derail that AWP program right off the bat. But they're the ones waiting for a lot of information, where you may not realize that equipment vendor data is impacting the ability for the civil works to complete their work. And we're often over-engineering the civil works by necessity of engineers want to optimize, but it's holding up that early delivery. That's super critical to really realize those relationships and be able to get that right. So with that being said, let's open it up to the questions to the group.
Thanks, Ted. I'll switch over to Slido momentarily. Okay, so questions are now live. You can start sending your questions and comments into our presenters with the information you see on screen there. Might just take a moment for those to start rolling in.
Maybe I'll jump in on this one as we see the path of engineering up there. Jay, do you want to add in on it?
Just go ahead, Ted, and I'll add.
Yeah, and so, I mean, again, there's actually a CII document where they really drew it out, and it's like, you've got a pump here and a vessel over here, and you may have a vessel on a complete other side of a rack or even another side of the plant, and the systems connectivity. Of course, we're building these EWPs to drive into the physical alignment with the CWPs, but that vendor information that's holding up because of the connectivity of the piping or the electrical can be impacting something that's not even related where that vessel sits. And also there's an evolution back to the path of engineering, and the first to go is the last to know. You've got this flow of how the design disciplines interact and engage with each other, where even though construction starts first with the civil works and the underground, the civil works is waiting for the design information from the equipment and the structural steel and the supporting, so they can finish up the structural steel to support the equipment and the piping, and the loading and the stress analysis of that loading is where, the civils team will get in the early design and plot plan concept layouts with the piping team, but to finish those civil packages, they're highly impacted by vendor data and process design.
And just to add to that, Ted, engineering typically, as we know, designs by systems, and now with advanced work packaging, they're being asked to deliver by packages, and that's a shift to some degree. And that's where all this change, everything that Ted talked about in terms of relating the vendor data to the engineering, to the EWPs, development of the EWPs, that becomes all the more critical with this change. The next one is, what's the reality of EWP 1:1 with CWP? In my experience, I've seen this pretty practically being done, EWPs with CWPs. Of course, there are engineering deliverables that could span across multiple EWPs, but inherently EWPs do relate to CWPs.
I
layer something on real quick on that one, if I can, Jane. This is something for us to think about as a community, and I think it's a one-to-many, and there's a simplicity in saying a one-to-one, but a fundamental part of the CWP is it shouldn't cross stakeholder boundaries, and inherently then becomes, if there's engineering deliverables and procurement deliverables within a CWP that go across stakeholders, it's good to identify that and drive it by stakeholder responsibility, that for this CWP, these stakeholders are supplying this information. Now, maybe from a prime EPC, they're gathering it up into a holistic package and delivering it as one. That's an ideal situation, but there's division of responsibilities that our definition of the EWPs and PWPs should divide stakeholder responsibilities into what's needed for a CWP. So the boundary should absolutely align, but it should be then divided by stakeholder responsibility. But I think we're still evolving best practice in this area.
That, if I may expand on that one, that is exactly what we have in Fluor. We have the same one-to-one definition for EWP to CWPs. In fact, we call it, when we have a contract that there is a full EPC scope, we call it only CWPs, and we have clear definition for each one of those of sections of the CWP that belong to engineering, which ones belong to construction, and which ones belong to even materials with the material part, and which part of those CWPs belong to the project control, giving us the start date and end date of the construction part in each one of them. I mean, yeah, definitely it is realistic on one-to-one relationship. However, at exactly the same documents, no, that are not, they have complementary information when you have a CWP that you don't have normally in your EWPs, but the scope is the same.
What's the difference between an EP contract versus an EPC contract in terms of AWP? There can be a pretty significant difference there. And primarily construction driving the engineering and procurement deliverables, it becomes a lot easier to manage in an EPC, and Silvana, I'm sure, will have something to say on that. Whereas in an EP versus C, a C could come in at a much later stage, in which case the path of construction, the sequencing, etc., that could be impacted. Also, in terms of setting the stage and the tools, etc., with an EPC, there's that much more uniformity of all of that versus an EP and an external C. Silvana, would you like to add?
Yeah, definitely you have less interfaces, correct? And what we used to call constructability reviews and construction programs, when we do reviews for model review and doing EP contract, that is the point when you as a client, that they have only an EP contractor, that you need to bring definitely your C part just to be part of those reviews and understand what is their vision as a C contractor and how they're going to be doing the execution of the path of construction. If not, you are losing that pre-planning portion that gave the ability to engineering to produce their deliverables according with the path of construction. It is more difficult, definitely, to define because you have more interactions, and you have one more interaction between your EP contract and your C contract, correct?
What projects under construction today are based on AWP? On this one, I'll answer this one. I'd like to refer to Robin Mikkelsen. He's developed an excellent map of projects using AWP. Robin Mikkelsen's from the AWP University, and CI has taken that map and they're developing it further. So we should get more on that in time to come.
But it's definitively going global and adoption's increasing, so it's exciting. Getting those stats posted would be outstanding.
And I will say as well that it's not only on the E&C industry, correct? We start to see more and more projects on the mining and metal. We start to see more projects on life science that there are being execution with the AWP methodology.
Is it possible to recover from late AWP implementation? Ted, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm going to say absolutely yes. In fact, the first decade of AWP was all late. It was typically, oh no, my project's in trouble. How do I recover? And but starting early and beginning with the end in mind is such a big advantage. It was a major result. But don't believe that just because I didn't get everything up front that I can't take advantage. But then you select which pieces you do and get selected by discipline and data availability. And be practical and trying to apply and kind of burn the ocean on all maturity levels of AWP is not a good way to go. But you can absolutely start AWP in a later part, and it may just default down. But remember, work-based planning is a subset of AWP. And Jay, if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump ahead to the next question and give again a hats off to Mark at Eastman. It was where I met Mark, where I went out to their facility in Tennessee, and it was the basic question in Kingsport was like, all right, we see that there's big benefit, and also AWP started out in smaller project ranges, but for that smaller project size, but it's a different, scalable AWP is a different animal. You've got to understand the nuances, but Mark and the Eastman team proved it, and they weren't going to just take my word for it. In fact, I was like, let's find out. It was, not only can we do the process and the methodology, but how do we, lightweight the tools and make it work? And so it has been, and I believe Eastman's not the only one. Shell has had good success in their Deer Park refinery. ExxonMobil's seen fantastic success in their refineries in Baton Rouge, and we are seeing AWP adopted on the smaller. And then there's that mid-tier size, which again, the first AWP project success in the early 2000s was on a $50 million brownfield project, and it just blew the team away that were already trying to build packages. So but you've got to right size it and make it fit for purpose.
The next one I think is on how is data intelligence controlled to ensure no surprises? And there's another one that I just saw, which is kind of relates to shall AWP data requirements be part of the contracts, and they're both related. Getting the detail into the contracts, early start, setting up the framework for ensuring that you have line of sight on what the data is going to deliver. It's very important to have that, and then have the right tools to ensure that there is collaboration across disciplines, across phases, using that data. So all of that needs to be set. That framework needs to be set up as part of the contract.
Yeah, and just like construction, you'll still have some surprises. You've got to be ready to adapt, and it's kind of a counterintuitive principle. But whereas construction projects, scope gets fixed with the design, and then you're managing the project against the balance between schedule and cost. With an AWP implementation, scope is one of your variables. Don't put something in the field that's not working. So if you do hit a surprise, you're better off slightly over scoping your AWP program, because you will hit surprises. In the world of data and trying to get companies to agree, even if it's in the contract, you may not get it. But if you've got enough coverage on your scope, you can shift lateral and get benefit in another area. So putting an agile management of your AWP deployment in place is a key part of AWP.
And I will add to that do a progressive quality check on your data, correct? And that is probably where my point on the maturity of your data, and review if all the information that you are asking is how you are getting that information, correct? That you do a progressive check during the engineer phase and the design phase, the data that you're getting on the 3D model, and for the different functions for a schedule, for cost, and for the start date on the schedule. There are different points of review that we can do progressively. Jay, I think that because I need to take care about the time as well, we have time for one more question, and we can move to the next part of the conference if you want.
Sure. Do you want to take this one, Ted, on Viva incorporating CII AWP data requirements into their suite?
And that's a resounding yes. I mean, fundamentally, the approach is built upon, but also having the flexibility that even if you're not doing AWP by the textbook, you can. A lot of the principles are universal, so you can also then have your variation in setting up that data model right from the start of the project and manage it as the project goes forward.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And right now we are in the time for the networking breaks. And we will see you back here at 4 o'clock for next plenary section. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Ted, Jaya, and Silvana are all accessible through FeedLoop. So if you have any questions that didn't get addressed, please reach out to them. Go to the Constructex booth, go to the FLIR booth, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions.